Hello and welcome to the University of Salford on YouTube. My name is Professor Andy Meyer and I'm delighted tonight to be inviting you to a conversation about Motherload, the movie, as part of the Festival of Social Science, which is hosted by the ESRC, the Economic and Social Research Council. We have a series of events taking place over November that are all dedicated to the festival. This is just one of many, and you can find many others on the festival website. So it's a wonderful evening because I think this is a fantastic film. I watched it just on Monday night and I'm really looking forward to the conversation, and congratulations especially to Graham and Luke for putting it together. And then without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Luke into the stream. So good to see you here, Luke, and I hope you're doing really well. We have a huge number of people already watching and the numbers keep going up. So I'm going to hand over to you and I look forward to sitting back and hearing the conversation.
Thanks so much, Andy, and good evening to everyone watching tonight. Thanks for joining us. My name's Luke Wojciechowski. I work at the University of Salford with Andy too, but I work in a research group which is called Healthy Active Cities. And we specialise in research that looks at active travel, sustainable transport, how we can move around cities in more sustainable, accessible ways. And last year, we did a research study into looking at the potential of electric cargo bikes in Greater Manchester and across the Northwest more broadly. It was about a 6-month to 8-month scoping study, and we spoke to a variety of different people who were using bikes, who were not using the bikes, to try and get an idea of what the potential were for e-cargo bikes moving forward, how people were currently using them. And effectively how we can sort of adopt and engage with this technology to sort of to increase our sustainability as citizens, as organizations, as businesses. And during this research project, this led me to discover the film Motherload. For some of you in the audience, you might be familiar with some of our public-facing events that we do as part of the Healthy Active Cities Research Group. Every couple of months, we do a seminar that looks at a different aspect of sustainable transport, active travel. We bring together some wonderful speakers, have some really interactive discussions with all kinds of different people who attend the events. And we were really keen to do a film screening of Motherload and follow it up with a discussion. Now, unfortunately, due to the circumstances of everything that's going on in the world, we had to make the difficult decision to decide that this had to be virtual. So we bought the licenses to watch Motherload, and hopefully everyone who's in the audience this evening had a chance to watch the film over the last couple of days. I watched it last night and thought it was absolutely excellent. I didn't really know what to expect when I started watching it, but it really opened my eyes, and I thought one of its wonderful strengths was just the positive attitude and the positive messaging around cycling and cargo bikes. And I think this is something maybe we'll come back to in the discussion tonight. But I think that language of positivity is so important when we start thinking about sustainability and behaviour change and things like that. Tonight, though, it's not just me, you'll be glad to hear. I'm going to be joined by a fantastic panel tonight who all have their own experiences of cargo bikes, whether it be personally, professionally, and they have many stories to tell. Really keen for us to interact with each other, to learn from each other, to ask questions, and really get a really nice, interesting conversation going about the role of cargo bikes, how they've been used, how we can use them more in the future, the challenges, potential, the opportunities. And so as viewers, I'm really, really keen that you guys feel free to throw as many comments, as many questions, as many thoughts. There's no such thing as a bad question into the chat box that hopefully you can see just next to the video stream where you are now. And we'll be able to pick those up and address them and explore them and interact with these ideas and questions as we go along. But without further ado, I'd like to invite the panel to join me on the screen. And it gives me, I'm very excited to introduce our panelists tonight. To start with, we have Glynis Joy Francis from Chorlton Bike Deliveries. We're also joined by Beata Kubitz from Cargodale, and we have Chris Leakey, who is from Manchester Bike Hire and Bambino Biking. Before we get started officially, I'd really like to invite the panel to introduce themselves and maybe tell us a little bit about the organisation they're representing and maybe just a bit about their relationships with cargo bikes more generally. And so to kick that off, if I can invite Glynis to start us off, that would be fab.
Great, thanks. Good evening. I'm here representing Chorlton, which is a suburb or part of Manchester City. We're south of the city. Chorlton Bike Deliveries, and I have to say I'm very new to cargo bikes. I probably would have been, particularly e-cargo bikes, I would have been a bit of a snob in the past and just thought you had to ride a proper bicycle. Anyway, I'm now a total convert. Chorlton Bikes started at the pandemic. None of us have any experience in logistics and green people, but really wanting to make a contribution to our community. And we're still here now, so 16, 17 months later, and at the beginning of December, we're just going to appoint our first person. So we've been running on a lot of love and community investment, a few grants, and a little bit of earning money. But I'm happy to tell you more later.
Brilliant, thank you, Glynis. It's so great for me to see how Chorlton Bike Deliveries is evolving and changing over the last year, because I remember speaking to you last spring when the project had just got off the ground and we were in the middle of COVID, and we're seeing all the potential around the project, and it's really great to see how it's grown and sort of accessed and maximised all of that potential. Chris, can I hand things over to you now for an introduction?
Thank you. So I'm Chris from Manchester Bike Hire and Bambino Biking. It's two names of the same company, essentially. Started at different times and merged together. We supply cargo bikes to businesses and individuals, and we also sort of specialise in helping people kind of choose the right cargo bike for their needs. And that came about through the I guess the birth of Bambino Biking. My background was cycle touring, and then when I had my children, it was a sort of natural progression to cycle with them. And we started a project to help other families get cycling and with their children. And through that journey, I sort of ended up using cargo bikes as my main means of transport. And now I'm lucky enough to help others do the same.
Fantastic, thanks, Chris. That's wonderful. And finally, can I hand things over to Beata?
Hi everyone, I'm Beata Kubitz. I'm a transport consultant in new mobility. before the pandemic. Well, I still am, and I kind of looked at a couple of projects involving cargo bikes as an evaluator, looking at how they changed transport patterns and reduced carbon emissions before the pandemic. And then the pandemic happened, and when I was consulting, I was, thinking, well, I live in Yorkshire, we don't really, it's a bit hilly, maybe cargo bikes won't work in the kind of area that I live in. Come the pandemic, and suddenly there's an opportunity to really, try this and see whether it's really true, because I could see vans pulling up in the lane and kind of blocking it quite a bit and churning up the surface. And I thought, right, what would we need to change that? Really, we should have some cargo bikes even around here, even though it's not a typical use case. So I phoned Chris actually and said, can I hire a cargo bike? And from that moment, in March 2020, Cargodale was born. Basically, very much like Glynis, a lot of volunteers, a lot of people using their furlough, their goodwill to help run a delivery service that got linked up local shops with local people to reduce the carbon, reduce the number of vehicles on the road. And we've really benefited from the goodwill of our local town, Todmorden in West Yorkshire, and council, who have really just supported it with funding and help and all sorts of things. So we're now an established community interest company, and we have 3 directors. We have a number of part-time staff and a permanent hub in Todmorden Indoor Market. So it's another good thing that's come out of the pandemic, and I think proving that you can actually deliver things even in hilly Yorkshire in the middle of the moorland.
Fantastic, thanks, Beata. I think one of the things to focus on there really is, the emphasis on hilly and moorland, and how cargo bikes aren't necessarily just tools for the last mile in congested urban spaces. They have real potential to be used in more rural and semi-rural areas as well. And I'm sure that's something we can come on to in a little while. To kick things off, I have a couple of questions just to get us going, and I'll start with a fairly easy one, but it's also one I'm really interested in hearing all of your thoughts on, which is, of course, over the last couple of days, we watched Motherload, the movie. What did you think of it? What were your initial reactions? Was it what you thought it was going to be like? Did you learn something new? Did it make you look at the cargo bike or the cargo bike revolution differently in any way? Sort of how did you walk away from that film feeling? Sort of what was going on in your mind? And I'll ask Chris to come in first on this one.
I think energized is the best way to describe it. It was just nice seeing other people's journeys and how they'd gone from, one bicycle with a trailer and then ended up on a cargo bike, which was a sort of similar journey to what I had. And then also to see that some of the struggles are the same, whether it be here or in America. So we've got a shared journey to go through together, but then also the successes that are already evident for the likes of the Netherlands, and there is a blueprint there, so that there is hope, and that we can achieve something.
Fantastic. Glynis, how about you?
Yeah, gosh, I ended up thinking if I was ever to make a film, I would have made this one. I really felt super touched by Liz's journey there, and I just think, well, I was that mum, I did have that child. I did strap her, in a papoose on my back, and I did cycle to work, and I did have people stop me and say, you're endangering your child, you're being irresponsible. And on the other hand, I just thought it's a mode of transport. And then when she was big enough, I put her in a child seat. And then when she was big enough again, I put her on a tandem. So at that time in 1979, early 80s, I don't think I'd ever heard of a cargo bike. It was child seat. And I think now, if I had a child, I would be the first one at the shop, Chris, you know, asking for one. I love the fact that actually this journey, and she just tells a really important story, just the importance of women, you know, and the importance of women of being the drivers behind bringing cargo bikes to life, not just for business, but, you know, in terms of family life. You know, that story's not been told, and all her links back to the journey women have been in order to be able to ride a bike. You know, it's so well linked, you know, superbly strung together, really, and very powerful. And of course, you know, the backlash, you know, I went to bed last night having watched it for the second time, and it, you know, we aren't free of people thinking they have every right to, you know, abuse us as cyclists and as women, and that's very sad. So in all the years, that still goes on, but those women aren't being deterred by it, are they? You know, it's like all power to them, really. It's beautiful, really lovely. I really also loved the quest, you know, going out into Africa, going out into places where a mode of transport is just so, you know, an alternative mode of transport is so essential for people to be able to just live their lives. So it's not just money making, it's actually, let's go right to the heart of where we can really, really learn from people. So it was an absolutely brilliant film, and, you know, thank you to Liz, really, for making it. And at times I can see a very hard journey for her in doing so, but yeah, beautiful.
I think that was one of the things that really shook me and surprised me while watching the film, actually, is just how much it delves into the sort of history of the relationship between women and the bicycle and the freedom that it gives, and then tying it sort of into Liz's own story as well, which is often quite challenging to watch and to listen to her tell it. Beata, what did you think?
Oh, I mean, it was just so inspiring. I think that it's really, I suppose it's a symptom of the pandemic a bit. You kind of do your own thing in your little box, don't you? And then we've all been sort of trying to figure out how to deal with all this stuff, and then suddenly to see all these other people who are figuring out the same things and coming up against some of the same problems, and also enjoying the same things, you know, and feeling, you know, you can do stuff that's just, you know, with your own two legs, and you can get. I mean, with us, it's deliveries, not children so much, but it's just the sense of achievement that you've got from kind of like being able to get stuff to people without being in a van, without having all these stresses. I mean, where we are, it's a really narrow roads, and everyone kind of gets a bit grumpy about when they meet someone coming in the other direction. But not cargo bike. You know? It's kind of like you're the magic instrument that can thread its way through every situation. So it was great, and it was and feeling that you were part of a whole a shoal of cargo. Is that the right sort of collective name? A shoal of cargo bikes that are threading their way through the world. And so that feeling of being part of something that is really going to change everything. And you know, and you know, looking ahead of us down the path at the Netherlands and thinking, right, you know, there are a few steps ahead of us, and Germany, where I have a lot of relations, and America, where, you know, some places are ahead of us and some places are behind us. It's you know, it's kind of, we're all on this same sort of course, going, actually, this is a much better way of moving ourselves, of moving our families, of moving stuff around. So yeah, that was great. And the other thing that really made me think was a couple of weeks ago, we had a kind of set of just a show and tell in the market in Todmorden, and that similar thing of people trying something out and going, oh wow, it really does work. You know, just that feeling of like, people around the world are putting these amazing tools into people's hands and letting them make the best of them themselves. And there's just something where you think, this is part of something that's going to, you know, that's going to like, you know, you've just thrown a stone into a pool and all the ripples are going to kind of continue spreading out forever.
Yeah.
I completely know how that feels, and I've got a question a question I want to ask in a moment that builds on some of those things you said, Beata, but I can see some comments coming in from the audience right now. I can see the chat box actually sort of brimming with things coming in. There's a comment here from Beck Bennett saying she wishes she'd been more aware of cargo bikes when her little children were younger. The bike trailer just wasn't the same. And I think that was summarized in its most glorious with that lady in the film cycling her 6 children to school. And it should be stressed that that was not on an electric cargo bike. That was just on a regular cargo bike. We've got a comment here from Edward Lamb saying he loved the movie so much. Great to see Chris here as well. They got their cargo bike from him 6 months ago. So great to see that you're still pushing the cargo bike cause, Edward, and I hope you've sort of been able to discover lots of new ways of sort of using the bikes. To bring it back to the question I sort of wanted to build on, you were just saying there about some of the community engagement you've done, Beata. What I found in the film last night was communities coming together was such a central theme in the film. For so many different reasons, not only in terms of solidarity, but in terms of safety, in terms of sort of growing the agenda, making it fun, communicating it to different people. I'd be really interested to hear from the panel on some of their experiences sort of engaging with the community and sort of what their initial reactions have been from people who have either seen them on a cargo bike, or maybe it's been a community engagement event and people have been coming up to ask questions or trying the bikes out. What's the sort of general sort of feeling you're getting? And I'll bring Chris back in for this one to start with.
When I first started, it was we were literally in a park with, it was me and another mum, and we had all our own bikes and our own trailers, and it was wonderful because we got to allow parents to get out with their children, and and a lot of them didn't have access to a car, and they were reliant on buses, and suddenly the bicycle gave them this freedom, and I spoke to a lot of mums in particular, because it was mainly mums that were coming to these sessions, and they'd felt so trapped after having their children, and the bicycle was just this huge liberation. You know, the cargo bikes have come on quite a lot in the last 4 years since we sort of started, and now that's opened it up to even more people. So I think it's that freedom is the nicest thing to be able to give to people.
I think that's what there was a quote in the film I remember that really resonated with me. It was quite early on when one of the women said, "My discovering my bike saved my soul." And I think that sort of really sort of tapped into some of the things you were saying there, Chris, about sort of just giving them freedom in a way that they didn't previously have. Beata, would you like to come in on this?
Yeah, it's 2 things. One is what's always was lovely during the real lockdown period when people were at home was pulling up with the cargo bike. You always ended up chatting to people because you're on a bike. You're open to the elements. You're open to people, and people loved it. It was a really, I don't know, it just seems to be a very engaging way of travelling. It's not, you're not shut up in a van, you know. It was covered quite extensively in the film, how open you are, and you know how easy it is just to, you know, be courteous and talk to people, check that people are okay. You're not trying to park anything really complicated or do 97-point turns, and I don't know. It's just a different, more generous way of traveling, and so that was really important. And I've just completely forgotten the other thing I was going to say. Do you want to go to the clinics? I'll see if I remember in a second.
I remember when we spoke last year, and you said there was a moment when one of your delivery riders, or maybe even you yourself, sort of turned into a street to your destination, arrived at the door just at the same time that a delivery van also pulled into the same street to do a delivery. And while you parked up, got out the bike, did the delivery, got back on the bike, the van was still doing sort of a 9-point turn to try and fit in.
There are some pretty tight roads around Todmorden. Yeah, the other thing I was going to say actually, and then sorry, is that to me, driving a car is wasting my time. I'm just sitting still. I'm trying not to crash and not to hurt anyone else on the roads. And you know, but I'm not doing anything that's positive for me. Whereas if I'm riding my bike, I feel like I'm doing something for myself as well. And quite interestingly, we found that we've been able to lend our bikes out on the same basis to people who want to do volunteer deliveries for the food bank, and we have a surplus food kind of redistribution service for food that's near its sell-by date. So a lot of their volunteers now use our bike, just hire them out on, borrow them on Sunday mornings to do that kind of thing. So it's actually made people do volunteering that also feels like they're doing something positive for themselves, and brought different people into doing activities that don't burn up the environment as well. You're not delivering something in a diesel van.
Yeah, that's also a really good point to add. Glynis, what would you say?
Yeah, we wouldn't make very much money if we had to get on and do deliveries, because every time you go anywhere, people want to have all these conversations, really. And I kind of feel really like I've found, I should have been in sales and marketing or something, because I just love those conversations, and it amazes me how people just feel at liberty to go, oh, it's a nice bike. Well, where'd you get that from? And what's that about? And oh, is it like this? So well, actually, you can store it like this, and it does this. And how many miles does it do? So I'm like, I'm really enjoying this. I'm having this fantastic time. Actually, I do need to get on and do some other deliveries. So, and we bought orange bikes, that you can't help. And then we've put some flowers on the front, and it just causes, lots of people to be super interested. So I'd quite like a commission, really, for promoting particularly our turn. But we've also, we bought one of the rally big trikes. It's got this huge white front to it, and we've had it decorated by a local artist that works with a lot of the shopkeepers. So it's kind of in a Chiltern style, and it's like a mobile piece of art. So we're, you can go around Manchester, and we had the cow parade and the elephant parade, and Brighton had some dogs. Well, we've now got this cargo bike that just looks like a piece of mobile art. So, and people for £20 can have their name painted on it, and a business for £100 can have their business paint. So we are actually, really right in the heart of our community. And I think there's a lot of ownership. Our volunteers all live locally. Most of our work, we're going into the city centre, but a lot of it is locally. So, and I think coming out of in the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, I think we represented in the film, I think they talked about heroes that offer hopeful, rousing perspective of the future. And that's what people were saying to us, that they really love what we're doing, because we in some ways represent an alternative way of doing things and a sense of what the future might hold. And I thought, okay, it's good enough for me. Thank you very much.
I have to say, I sort of completely know where you're coming from with regards to the attention you get from riding a cargo bike, because I don't have one. I have my bicycle, which I obviously think is the most beautiful bike in the world, but nobody ever comments on it. One afternoon, about a few months ago, maybe half a year ago, I rented a cargo bike from Manchester Bike Hire for an afternoon just to do a couple of things. And I must have had about 6 or 7 people just stop and ask me about what it was that I was riding, totally different sort of engagement experience. And an opportunity, as you said, to start the conversation and sort of share that sort of positivity with people as well. I am keen to bring in some questions from the audience now. I can see loads of comments in, not a huge amount of questions, but everyone feel free to just fire away and ask whatever's on your mind. I can see one coming in from Robert Campbell here. How can we combine to push for more better infrastructure now? And I think maybe there's an emphasis on the now, particularly in that question. And there's a lot to unpack, I imagine, there. So I'm sure we can cover lots of different things between us. But to start with, I'll bring in Beata.
This is one of my favourite topics because infrastructure is something that is really holding us back in this country. I recently was asked to comment on a report by that Shimano that makes e-bike motors, one of the e-bike motors that's on the market, wrote about attitudes to cycling, and it was quite upbeat. It looked at loads of different European countries and people's attitudes to cycling, and whether the e-bike could replace the car. And so e-cargo bikes were part of that equation. They said, look, do you want to have a look at the figures? I got a little preview, and that was really interesting because in all of Europe, the cost is a massive issue for people buying e-bikes and e-cargo bikes, and that is absolutely understood. But in the UK, nearly as big an issue, and we were the only country for which this was the case, was safety. So, you've got this situation where our safety is as much of an issue as the cost of an e-bike, as much as a £5,000 bike. So, and in the rest of Europe, this is not so. It's half the rate it is in the UK or less. So I think that's a big thing. And so, the other thing that we really need to think about is the sustainable economy and how we grow the sustainable economy. Because if we have got to get to net zero, we have got to stop driving in the enormous quantities that we do drive, and we have to change the way that we move both people and goods. And bikes are a solution to that. But bikes aren't just an active travel solution; they are also an enormous piece of economic a contribution. If you look over the channel, I had for a job that I was doing, I had to read the entire German cycling strategy. It's like this thick, this is because we're German and we do these sorts of things. And the German cycling strategy is about infrastructure, and it sees infrastructure as a way of leveraging bike sales, and bike sales being part of this sustainable economy that makes a huge contribution to the German economy. It's £6 billion worth of contribution to the economy every year. There are 200,000 people in Germany who are employed, not in cycling on its own or tourism on its own, but just in cycle tourism. 200,000 people whose sole employment is cycle tourism. So, and it's seen as a way of developing economic activity in some of the German states that are not as economically active. We know about all the ones that are producing BMWs and all of that sort of stuff. But in the states that are not kind of part of the German economic engine, cycling, cycle tourism is part of that. How we get our states engaged. So I think we really need to not just think about it as active travel. We need to think about it as part of the economy, a big important part of this change that we need to make. We need to be employing people in repairing bikes, in training, in hiring bikes, in getting the message out there, and it could be something that adds to the sustainability not just of our roads but also of our communities and the economic fabric of the country.
So many good points there, and they sort of echoed in some of the findings we found in our research last year as well, particularly the issues around cost in this country. A lot of people drawing comparisons between the sort of very well-established second-hand van market and the cost of some e-cargo bikes new because they haven't had the time to sort of embed themselves into a more established second-hand market at the moment as well. So definitely a lot to go in there, and safety came up for us as much of an issue as cost as well. And I think that those two barriers in many ways share the same space as barriers to cycling more broadly, but nevertheless are still there when it comes to e-cargo bike adoption as well. Chris, could I bring you in on this question?
I think the biggest thing is not to give up, because having been campaigning for better cycling conditions for a long time, it feels like from the inside that it's so slow, and why isn't it going faster? And it can be disheartening. So I sort of go through phases of putting more energy or less energy into it, and it's not, there isn't unfortunately an overnight fix for a lot of these things, and it is going to take time. The second bit, I think, is just more practical in understanding what's already going on in your area. Have they got a plan? Some local authorities have a plan. It might not be a good plan, but having some plan is better than no plan. And then I think finding other people that are have got similar aims and ideas, and working as much as you can collaboratively. And there are easy wins in some situations. It's like some small changes can make a big difference. I think the last thing is sometimes concentrating on the cycling isn't the best carrot almost, and that the environmental and safety impact is a bigger one, particularly around schools. And where my kids go to school, it's it's a relatively sort of quiet area from through traffic, but there's in the morning there's loads of people dropping kids off there, and we know that the environmental health impacts of that is big because of all the drop-offs, and then people are pavement parking and so on, and that evidence has come through some of the work that I know Sustrans have done around school streets. And I think that is a bigger motivation for people, whether you like cycling or not, to provide a better infrastructure. And I think when people realise and have experienced a better infrastructure, they're more likely to continue to use it. So it's it's not there isn't one solution. There's many things, and it's a perseverance that will get us there.
Yeah.
I think that's a really nice way of sort of putting it around perseverance, and keep sharing that sort of positivity and introducing people to their potential and the opportunity for sort of what changing these spaces can do for people. It's not just about the act of cycling. See a comment coming in here from Michelle saying she loved the concept of the connection to all of our senses when we cycle, and how healing that is for our mental health. There was a really nice few scenes in the film actually where Liz, the filmmaker, was cycling through the forest or cycling through the parks and just sort of experiencing the nature. And I think there was a scene right at the beginning where she said we've lost touch with our physical selves. We sit in front of screens, we sit in cars, and when we're children, we're out and about and we fall over and we engage and we touch and we smell. And something about sort of losing a little bit of that as we become adults is something that the bicycle can sort of reintroduce us to. And Edward, I can see Edward here saying that they have to plan an extra 5 to 10 minutes for their journeys to speak to strangers. Yeah. That's a nice. I hope that's a nice problem to have. It sounds like a nice problem to have to factor in. But I'll bring Glynis in finally for this question about sort of how we can get better infrastructure.
Yeah, I'm totally with Chris there about not giving in. And I feel like, I've been on this one for I'm a lifelong cyclist. But the great thing now, and I think it's Beata's point, is it's not just about cycling. So, we have now in Greater Manchester a really good walk cycle campaign. And by forging alliances, we're not just talking to one particular community, and it's not just, the lycra clad brigade either. So I think there's a much wider alliance. We're working with the Ramblers Association, with the school, street closures groups. That feels, at a community level, like we have more weight and force and potential. But then, when it comes back to sometimes feeling very powerless about stuff at infrastructure level, and frustrated, and I'm thinking I don't have that many years left. I'd love to see the I think, was it in Copenhagen, where there was this beautiful lit bridge over, you know, it's like a piece of art, and you're thinking, wouldn't people just love to cycle on this, you know, this kind of lit up pathway? Is, you know, in me, I'm, you know, there's a road warrior, you know, and I just love to meet these other road warriors, you know, and you just do a little hand signal, and you just know that actually I'm taking my space in the road here. Sorry if you have to wait a little bit longer, but just read my high-vis jacket that says Chiltern Bike Deliveries, you know, take your time, you know, and you can't do that all day, every day, because actually it's quite exhausting, and I've done it for a long time. But I think, you know, it comes right back to if you can't be what you can't see. And I think if people see you and you're out there, whatever the weather, that I think that's an inspiration, and on a personal level, that's the best I can do, really. Yeah.
Thanks, Glynis. Some really interesting points coming across from the whole panel there on that one. A very big question, but an also really pertinent question, and not only pertinent because of everything that's going on with COP26 at the moment, but also long term, a very important thing to be thinking about. I can see that there's a comment come up here from Michelle about the fear of getting on a bike after many years of not cycling, and how it could be a challenge for parents starting to cycle on busy roads. I think maybe Chris might be able to say something on this. If I could pass over to Chris to sort of reflect on Michelle's comment.
I have this conversation with so many parents, and it's not, you know, it's a valid feeling, so don't dismiss it. And when I started with my children, they were as young as 3 months old when we were cycling, and I was, you know, they were tiny, and I was like, you know, they were precious, and I didn't want them to be hurt. So I took my time, and, you know, I knew my local area fairly well from already. And, you know, even if you don't, you can go and explore that on foot. And what I always say to people is start small, you know, find the roads that you are comfortable on. If you have to go a longer route, then just take that extra time to do it. And what I found with my children was that I ended up with a network of routes to get to places that I wanted to. And as I got more confident, that network expanded, and I went on other roads. And you know, in some situations, we were fortunate to have, you know, a little bit of better infrastructure to come in. So it was a matter of taking it slowly, and not necessarily taking the obvious path, but taking the path that you feel comfortable on. And the other bit is that when we used to go to new places, I mean, the bike was my main means of transport, and it still is. You know, and so I would be asked to meet up with another family, and, you know, it might be sort of 10 miles away, and I would go and do that on the bike because we had the time. I was a stay-at-home dad this period, and I would use Google Maps to look at the route, because you could go down to Street View, and I'd be like, well, I don't like that road, so and I'd find a different one and go and do it. Or it said that there was a cycle route on it, and I was like, well, that's not a cycle route that I want to go on. So I took that extra time, and you know, occasionally you ended up in a place that wasn't amazing, but you know, 90% of the time it was okay. So yeah, I think like with anything, that, you know, the first step is the hardest one, and then just keep taking those little steps, and you get more and more confident as time goes on.
Thanks. I think hearing that from a personal point of view to people who share those sort of concerns, I think, is a really useful piece of advice. I think, well, more broadly, when it comes to infrastructure, there's sort of a lot of things around political will in relation to infrastructure as well. I'm wondering, Beata, if you'd like to sort of come in on that.
So yeah, I think the one thing I say to all my riders is that every time you ride down the road, you're making things safer for other cyclists, because the more of us there are, the safer it becomes per mile cycled. So, you know, every time you get on your bike, you're doing a good thing. But then also, if there are any councillors or local politicians out there listening, one of the things that is very interesting about the campaigning aspect and infrastructure is that there's a quiet set of people who tend not to get involved in debates because they can get a bit shouty, but who will continue to vote for you for bringing in cycle infrastructure. Wherever I've looked when I do sort of my wider work, There are examples of, like in Paris, Mayor Hidalgo, she brought in cycle infrastructure right into the heart of Paris, closed off roads to cars. It's accelerated over the pandemic, and there was a lot of shouty backlash from car drivers, but actually her majority increased when it came down to voting for it. So, and similarly down in Walthamstow, the Waltham Forest mini Holland was enormously controversial when it was created, and there was a lot of backlash, and they kind of pulled back some of the plans, not all of them. They were pretty, the core of it remained. And then the council, came up for election, and every single opposition party was anti-Mini Holland, but the party that was in power that put the Mini Holland in increased its majority. So there might be a lot of shouting about car drivers who want their rights, but they're noisy, but not necessarily the majority. And I think that's a really important lesson for politicians, that they really should be sticking to their guns on cycle infrastructure, on lanes for cyclists, because it stands to reason brigade. They might be loud, but they're not everyone, and they're not actually everyone that's voting for you either. So, stick to your guns when it comes to cycle infrastructure.
I think that's a really nice point. It's also really important, I think, as there can sometimes be a tendency sort of when you're in the environmental world to feel a little bit alone, or feel as though your voice is sort of lost in a sea of other shouty voices that disagree with you. And so finding that community, obviously really important in that respect as well. But also, as you just said, knowing that there are people, and perhaps the majority of people out there might share a viewpoint more similar to yours than you initially think, is also a really important thing to talk about. I think we have another question coming up through the audience now from Sally Watson. She's asking, are cargo bikes carrying older children just a symptom of a dysfunctional transport system? And what does celebrating this mean for their own independence? That's a very specific question, Sally. I like it. To start with, I'll invite Glynis to sort of come in on this if you'd like to, Glynis.
Yeah, I'm not aware of cargo bikes carrying older children, so I don't know quite, Sally, what age you're thinking about. I know in the movie, I think there were maybe one or two actually sitting on the back of long tail bikes. I suppose I'm more interested for younger people that they have options around their transport system. And so, where we've got bikeability, and, we've now had 10 years of kids in most schools being given bikeability training, they are actually going to be the generation who will take up their space on the road. And as a parent and a grandparent, seeing, grandchildren ride down the middle of the road, put their hand out and turn right, it's like, oh my God. But actually, they've been trained, and I think that's a choice that they're making. And I have to just trust the cars behind don't want to run them over or kill them, really. So I think I'd like children to have that opportunity of cycling on their own, but I'm not sure I can offer any more to that, Luke.
That's okay. I think that was a nice start. Chris, would you like to come in on it a little bit more?
Very much so. This is one of the things I talk about a lot when I'm talking to families about cycling, and I'll go back a step and say that yes, a better infrastructure would mean that children from a younger age could cycle more independently. There's no question about that. My 8-year-old would be able to cycle more places if it was safer. He was cycling independently in the Netherlands when we were touring there as a family, and he couldn't do that at 8, 4 years later in the UK. But I think the bigger thing for me is that not to be afraid, though, to take older children. I talk about 2 types of cycling. There's cycling for transport and there's cycling for leisure. And when we are cycling for leisure, my children are very, much as much as possible on their own bikes. If they want to be on the cargo bike, they can be. But equally, it's the leisure time is for us to ride as a family. The transport is slightly different. Often we need to get from A to B, and we've got a time limit to get there because we've got a swimming lesson or a gymnastic lesson to get to. And the kids are, even at age sort of 10, they can't get there as quick as I can on a cargo bike, or even on the back of a non-electric one. So I think when you are riding, just deciding what you are doing and why you're doing it. And if you put that back to a car, even you wouldn't expect a 13-year-old to drive a car to go to their gymnastics lessons. And there's often this comment like that you get with older children: "Oh, shouldn't they be cycling on their own by now?" And that's not the point. The point is that we're using the bike to get there, and this is the best and most efficient way to do it. When one of the bikes that we sell, the guy Josh Hon, who's the head of the company, he still takes his 14-year-old to football practice on the back of the bike. And he said, "Are you okay with this?" And it was like, "Yeah, of course." And it was just normal for him. And apparently he sits on the back of the bike and he has his breakfast and and that's just normal for them. So it's it's okay. But I get the point, Sally, that the infrastructure could be better. And that would certainly, for shorter journeys, just to go to the shops, it would make life a lot easier if we could just if we could all do it from a younger age.
Yeah, fantastic. I could see the comment coming in from Sally saying she found it interesting that it took a Dutch woman to say the kids just travel themselves to school on their bikes. For most families, this is way more affordable. Arthur, would you like to come in on that last question as well?
I mean, I just think it's infrastructure. I think, yes, we have a dysfunctional transport system if your kids can't cycle to school. I'm not a parent, but I have plenty of friends who are, and they are dedicated cyclists, but where we live, they hesitate to take their younger children, let their younger children ride themselves to school. That's a really good point. We've got a really good question coming in now, which is it's from Alison Stenning, and she's asking, how do we extend the campaign for cargo bikes to be more inclusive in terms of age, class, and disability, for example? So really broadening out the inclusivity of cargo bikes more broadly. Could I ask Chris to come in on this one to start with?
It's a big question. So where to start? And I think all of those, like age, class, and disability, they're all they've all got different elements to it, and I think class can be taken in so many different ways as well. In terms of age, I think that there's a bit of perception more than anything around that, and actually not necessarily cargo bikes, but electric bikes in general can make cycling more accessible to people that are older when they were struggling potentially. If I take my mum, as an example, she was in a cycling group, and most people were 10 years younger than her, and she got an electric bike, and she could finally keep up with everyone again, and it was amazing because it continued. It enabled her to continue to cycle. She was fortunate that she had the money to be able to do that. So yes, there is a barrier to some people being able to access this, and it's something that, as a bike shop owner and someone that sells bicycles, it's something that I'm very much aware of, that not everyone can afford this, and I'm desperate for ways to make it more accessible to people from a cost perspective. We in the film there was the one shop that had that 0% interest over 12 months, so that the payments could be spread, and we've done that now, so we can also offer that to our customers, and but it's still quite big payments, and we'd like to be able to extend that further, but it takes quite a lot of time to be able to set that up. As for disabilities, I think that I wouldn't classify myself as an expert, but some of the people that I have met that have been unsure about cycling have gotten really well with cargo trikes. and there's quite a lot of adaptations that can be done to make that accessible. I know there's a friend of the university there who rides a trike around Manchester with her dog and has a disability, and this has changed their lives essentially. So I think it's just, you know, having access to try these things helps. If you can try it, then it's a matter of whether you can afford it, and then, you know, how we bridge that affordability gap is a bigger question that I wish I could answer overnight, but that requires I think a lot of support from the government. We've talked about bike subsidies, and I hope that they do come in time. I think the bike industry isn't ready for it yet, because we already have a short supply of bicycles, and so I think until we've caught up, the subsidies wouldn't necessarily be that useful, because there wouldn't be the bikes would just run out overnight.
There's a really good project in Todmorden that makes electric bikes accessible to people with disabilities, that I do some work with, called Empowered People. So if there's anyone out there that needs to try an electric bike, trike, some cargo capabilities, some with not, then Empowered People is the place to go for that. And having done quite a few rides with Empowered People, because we kind of do social rides and things, the massive issue is infrastructure, and making sure that infrastructure is actually inclusive, that what is big enough for a cargo bike and a tricycle and a recumbent, you know, they all have to be accommodated within our cycle infrastructure. Otherwise you're making something that's exclusive and not inclusive. No steps. I mean, you cannot get a trike over a step. You can't get a fully laden cargo bike up a step.
No.
You can see them in infrastructure. Or, yeah, you can go over that railway bridge with a kind of tiny little ginnel that you're supposed to put the wheels in. I mean, come on, no way. That is so rubbish. And so, you know, these sort of half-measured cycle infrastructure just don't even bother. Get there, segregated infrastructure, plenty wide enough, nothing, no horrible chicanes, no weird kind of like barriers that you have to kind of squeeze through, or you just can't. I mean, I've had to try and lift someone's, you know, tricycle over a foot-high barrier just to get them down the route that we kind of thought the gate wouldn't be locked. Stupid us. So there's an inclusivity with mobility issues and cargo bikes and other electric bikes, and then there's also, you know, with economic issues. If you don't live in housing that has got secure parking for your cargo bike, then that's an off-putter. So we need councils to really be looking at not providing cheap car parking and free car parking on the street, but providing proper lock-up, secure places that people can keep cargo bikes without losing their precious investment, their wheels, the way they go shopping, the way they navigate their lives. You know, there's a whole load of stuff that's infrastructure related, which makes cargo biking more inclusive, and that is providing the tools for people to do that. And then the other thing is the role models. You know, if you want people from different ethnic backgrounds and different genders and different classes and different age groups, you need to see other people like you doing that thing, and then so you realize, this is for me, it's not just for them over there, it's for all of us. It's role models, it's infrastructure, and it's really being sure that your economic barriers aren't erected.
Thank you, Beata. It's a strong message there of do it properly, or you know, rather than sort of like these half measures. I enjoyed the shout out as well to one of my colleagues, Harry, actually, who cycles in e-cargo trike with her dog around Manchester, and her dog Frida is becoming a Twitter star. So so if you want to learn more about that, I'd recommend following Tricycle Mayor on Twitter, because she's always getting some great conversations up. Right, I'm aware of time, and I want to ask one last question really, really quickly, very short answers if possible. I noticed that in the film, they talked about cargo bikes coming out of this town in California, and one of the early designs of a cargo bike was from a guy who basically wanted to find a way of taking his kayak to the beach. Californian thing I've ever heard of in my life. But in terms of your experiences, what is the craziest thing you've ever carried on a cargo bike? Quite quick, we haven't got much time, but I'll go to you, Chris, first.
I've carried so many things on a cargo bike. I think I did an event. So we've got cargo trailers that go behind the bike, and so usually I have a gazebo with weights, 2 adult bicycles, a kids trailer, a kids bicycle, and all the bits for the event, towed by a cargo bike with my kids in it. I did an event in Manchester, and it was on the Fallowfield Loop, which is an off-road cycle lane. And I knew that getting back up the hill was going to be interesting, because I didn't think that the motor and my legs would make it. We got 95% of the way, and fortunately I was able to push the rest. But yeah, I've got lots of fun stories, and I am about to try and see if I can get my 17-foot canoe on the back of my bike. That's
nice. I'd like to see a photograph. Yeah. Very quickly, just over to Glynis.
Yeah, a penguin. There you go. Didn't expect that one, did you? And Christmas trees. So we've been doing Christmas tree deliveries. We've had a trailer attached to the bike, but 6, 7 foot, 8 foot Christmas trees.
Oh, amazing. Thank you. And finally, Beata.
Another shout out for another organisation, Trash Free Trails. We helped Trash Free Trails in Calderdale clear the countryside. You know, we're mountain bikers as well as cargo bikers. And on a Trash Free Trails haul, we managed to get a mattress on a cargo bike and a piano. So there you go. We thought we'd be picking up a few gel wrappers, but
piano comes right at the end then, maybe to take the prize. Well, thank you all to the panel. That's been a really thoroughly enjoyable hour for me. That's just flown by, and I'm sure there's loads more we could talk about if we had a little bit more time. But I'd just like to sort of extend my thanks to the panel for joining me tonight and answering some questions and providing some really interesting debate. And thank you to all of the audience joining us tonight as well. I'm aware that we've got quite a few viewers, so thank you for watching the film and coming to sort of interact with us and chat with us about the film. And I hope everyone goes on to enjoy their evening. Before I say goodbye completely, I think we have a feedback form that's going into the chat, and if you're able to sign that, fill that out for us, that's really helpful for the funder who's supporting these events and helps us sort of go on to put on more events for you guys. So if you could take a moment to do that, that would be fab. And in the meantime, have a wonderful evening, and thanks again to the panel for a wonderful hour.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Cheers.